in one spot. Snakes right here, and then there was some other meat that was touching each other, and I'm like,
Sure, and they're all crapping on each other.
yeah.
Exactly. Okay, we need to get started. Okay, so the question is, why are Americans so individualistic? And one of the things we're going to discover is, why did so many people vote for Donald Trump last time? Of course, he lost the election by 3 million votes, almost 3 million, 2.8 million votes. But he won the Electoral College, and that's why he's the President of the United States. So why did so many people vote for Donald Trump? We're going to try to figure this out in just a second. Many surveys reveal that Americans feel more financially pressed than before, even though real incomes have been rising and time pressures have increased as two-career families have become common. Putnam speculates that because of the feeling that we're not making enough money, increases our individualism by about 10%, as curious as that is, because we feel like we're not making enough money. This is a common complaint in the United States. This isn't fair, we're not making as much money as we need to make more money. And a lot of people feel that way, including my wife. My wife complains to me that we're not making enough money. She makes $60,000 a year just from her retirement pay. I make $24,000 a year just from my Social Security. I make $60,000 a year here, and it's still not enough money. Her Social Security is only about $12,000. So you put all that together, that's close to $150,000. She still complains that we don't have any money, which is kind of irritating. I'm busting my tail, but she's still not happy. I don't understand. What can I do? What does she want? And she wants me to retire. If I retire, that's $60,000 less that we have to spend. I don't know how she's going to do it. Suburbanization is another reason for increased individualism in the United States, according to Putnam. This factor is also at about 10%, suburbanization. If we were more collectivists, we would be spending a lot more time with our neighbors. And I was just talking about the caucus. The only time I see my neighbors is at the caucus. The only people I know in town are the guy that fixes my car. You know, he's my buddy, he's my friend. I can talk to just about anybody, but I don't usually talk to anybody in Lost Nation, Iowa. And the only time we ever get together is when we talk to each other. The people that I worked with were 35 miles away. They were down by the river. We were 35 miles from the river, living in Lost Nation, Iowa. And that's why we caucused where we caucused. We didn't caucus in Clinton. Suburbanization results in people spending more time in their cars and in their homes and less time with their friends and their neighbors. I didn't spend any time with friends and neighbors because, yeah, it took me 45 minutes to drive 35 miles, which is a little faster than I should have been going, but that's okay. I hardly ever ran into the police. Anyway, so it took me 45 miles to drive to work and 45 miles to drive back. The people that I worked with lived it's the same county, but I live in one corner of the county and they live in the other corner of the county. So we really only interacted at work. The people that I lived close to were all farmers, and there's no reason for me to talk to those people. There's just no reason to talk to them. Anyway, suburbanization. And this is becoming more and more common. Where I lived in Iowa, there's a reason why I didn't move to the city or to the town, Clinton. There's a reason I didn't move there. I don't like cities. I don't like being that close to people. I don't like people looking in my windows, like anybody would, but the idea is that I have a neighbor that's a half mile down the road, and that's south of me, and then I have another neighbor that's about a quarter of a mile down the road, and that's north of me, but they can't see even the lights of my house. If I turn the lights off in my house, you don't even know that my house is there. In the city, of course, you got a house. so everybody's so close to each other, but where I live, it's not that way. Anyway, that's why I wanted to move out there, because I don't like people. Well, maybe a little bit. The second largest culprit to increased individualism among Americans at 25% is electronic entertainment, especially television. Of course, everybody has television. Almost everybody had a Super Bowl party yesterday. Kansas City won. I don't know if you watched the game or not. I was talking to Marius before I came over to class, and he was saying, I shouldn't have watched television. I should have done my work, instead of watching television. But evidently, it took him 5 hours to watch the damn Super Bowl. Why does it take 5 hours to watch a football game? It only lasts for an hour and a half, so why in the world are you watching it for 5 hours? People, I know. My daughter does the same thing. I gave up watching sports when I was working on my PhD because I needed all that time. I was watching college basketball and baseball on television and football every Sunday. I needed that time to work on my PhD, and that's the only way I finished. It still took me 11 years to finish it. So this is a passive form of entertainment. It represents 25% of the individualism in the United States. Big problem, you watch your television show, it's not like you're going and visiting your friends, you're not hanging out with your friends, you don't watch the same television shows, you talk to each other maybe a little bit about what shows you're watching and what shows they're watching. So you think, well, maybe I'll binge watch their show or something. But people are doing all kinds of strange things like not spending any time with other people, they're just binge watching their television shows. And that's something brand new. Now, Putnam did his research in 2000. 2000, you couldn't record things like you can today. You had to use a DVD or a VCR. I think it was VCRs in 2000, pretty sure. And then they had DVDs. They had VCRs and they had DVDs, and now of course I've got cable and I can record anything I want, and I do. I'll record a movie. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll go through a whole week's of old movies to see which ones I want to record. I know. So when I go home tonight, I'll watch Bob and Hart's Abishola. I just love that show. I just love love. It's just kind of interests me, even though Bob's as big as a truck and Abishola's taller than he is, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, I love that show. So I recorded NCIS. I recorded NCIS New Orleans. I recorded. And so I can watch it any time. What other television shows do I watch? Mostly PBS. Anyway, and old movies. There's something wrong with me. Putnam in 2000 discovered that the younger generation even watch television differently from the way that their parents and grandparents do. This drives me crazy because if there's other noise in the room, sometimes I can't hear people talking because there's a distracting noise. And I don't know why this is, but if there's something else happening at the same time I'm trying to have a conversation with people, I can't hear them. I can't pull their noise out of all this other noise that's going on. So this drives me nuts. My daughter will do this, my son will do this, he'll watch something. And he's trying to have a conversation with me at the same time something's going on television. So it just drives me nuts. So I don't talk to my son anymore. I can't hear him. So they will just keep the televition on for background noise, I guess. The older generation are more likely to watch television only when there is a particular show that they want to see. The rest of the time, I'll just turn off the damn TV. And sometimes I'll do that. I'll go to my daughter's house. I'll just turn off the television. It's going on, and nobody's watching, which drives me nuts. It's like they're wasting all that electricity just to keep the television on. So I'll just turn the television off. And of course, then my daughter turns it right back on because there's something she wanted to see. Well, this is my favorite part of this show. Approximately half of the variance between the increasing individualism rests with the different lifestyles between the younger and the older generations. Who was I talking to? Jeremiah, and he was saying something about the present generation is spending more time doing something. It's a little unnerving. You'll walk from here to my office and you'll pass 4 or 5 people and none of them will make eye contact with you. Not only will they not make eye contact with you, but even if you say something to them, they don't hear you because they've got those damn earbuds in, right? And now the earbuds don't even have wires on them, they just kind of hang in your ears. So you don't even know. You're at the airport and this lady's just talking up a storm and you think, oh my God, she's schizophrenic. She must be crazy. No, she's on the damn telephone. It's a little dot in her ear. She just touches it to turn it on and off. And so we all get to listen to her conversation, which is always fascinating. To listen to somebody else's, just half a conversation. We're going to just listen to that. One of the most remarkable findings regarding cultural change is that people seem to be getting smarter. This is really kind of exciting. People are getting smarter. On average, across all the cultures for which there is longitudinal data, people in the current generation have higher IQ scores than those from earlier generations. Don't worry, if we legalize marijuana, all the IQs will go down. So this may neutralize what we call the Flynn Effect, that we are getting smarter. Now, why in the world are we smarter now than we used to be? What makes us so damn smart? Why are you so much smarter than not your cohorts, and if they were your cohorts?
That's technology.
Technology makes us smart. I was watching an advertisement, and this guy got out of his car and he punched a button and it parked itself. His car parked itself. Smart car. It was in Boston. He called it smart car.
I know it. What show are you talking about?
It's a funny commercial. The car parked itself. That's really kind of fun. My wife bought a new Honda. She's got a Honda. That's her car. My car is a CX-5. Mine's a 2016. Hers is a 2019. Well, I have her car because it's not a very good winter car and it's really snowy up and my car's a good winter car because I'm smart enough to buy a winter car in Iowa, okay? So my poor wife yesterday, I'm talking to her, I called her on the telephone. She said, I just had an accident. Of course, she had an accident in my car, okay? She just messed up my car. I wasn't worried about that, I don't care. Well, I do a little bit, but not that much. Anyway, she just had an accident in my car. The reason she had an accident, she was backing out of a parking place and she backed into somebody. Well, now they have those backup cameras, okay, which is kind of a nice, pretty good deal. And unfortunately, my car doesn't have it, but her car does. So she was used to backing up using the backup camera, and since my car doesn't have it, she just backed right into this guy. Because she's used to not paying attention to her rear view mirrors, her side mirrors, not seeing anything. I can't use that damn backup camera, it drives me crazy. So I back up using my side mirror so I can see what's going on. But she didn't, and so she's had an accident in my car. That's okay. So technology it's one of the reasons. It's going to make us worse drivers, I'm afraid.
Well, the reason why I said that was because
You are right.
we open up our phone,
Yeah.
dictionaries are there, the internet's right there, instead of
Right.
like compared to before where we had to actually make effort to go to the building.
You know, you had to go to the library
Then
to
you
find
gotta go over
anything.
there, then you gotta look through a dictionary and everything like that, so. Yeah.
The way we used to have to do research, it was horrible. You had to go to the library and there was this big green book with all the journals in it. So if you knew what the title of your journal was or the author of the article that you were looking for, you had to find his name in this great big green book. And then you had to go to the stacks and find that issue. Or that volume, I know, it was hard. But now, I mean, everything's on your damn telephone or your computer. So yeah, so I'm wondering about, I was watching a music video today. For some reason, I turned on my music, and I was watching this lady by the name of Vonda Day. And I was thinking, God, she looks anorexic. I wonder if she's still alive. This is a song from the 1980s. And so I looked her up. I was able to look her and find her on Wikipedia, of course. Everything's on Wikipedia. She's still alive. I was shocked because she looked like a heroin addict in the video, which was, heroin chic was very popular back in the 80s. So I imagine that's the reason she was so skinny. She's still alive today. I was worried that she died of anorexia or something, These kinds of things happen. Sometimes I'll look actors up just to find out how they died or why they died. Sometimes they die in their 40s or 50s. They died of cancer, Gregory Peck, not Gregory Peck, who am I thinking of? Robert Taylor, or, all those guys died at 59 and 60. Why did they die so young? Well, he would smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day. So sure they died in their 50s and 60s, but you're right, you're absolutely correct. You can open your telephone. I kind of like traveling with my wife because if there's a song on, I can say, geez, I wonder whatever happened to the 1910 Fruit Gum Company. And so she'll say, hey Google, and she'll ask 1910 Fruit Gum Company, and then she gets the whole Wikipedia thing going and finds out what happened to the 1910 Fruit Gum Company, which was a bubblegum rock company, band from the 1970s. Write this down, 1910 Fruit Gum Company. Okay, so we're smarter now than we've ever been before. And this is known as the Flynn Effect. This is James Flynn. He was born in Washington, D.C., was educated at Harvard, and now he's in New Zealand. And he's the one that came up with this concept of the Flynn Effect. It was really controversial in the beginning because in the beginning he was looking at different racial groups. And he was saying, hey, look, white people are getting smarter and black people aren't. Initially, he realized that there was a flaw in his research. So now he just says, yeah, everybody's getting smarter. And the reason he looked at 14 different nations around the world is because he's in New Zealand now. So he wanted to find out if the Brits were smarter, if the Australians were smarter, if the Americans were smarter, Germans, French, that kind of thing. So what he discovered that our IQ increases between 5 and 25 points in every generation, the average IQ score. So when I was young, if you had an IQ score over 120, they considered you a genius, which was kind of fun. Now it has to be over 130, and it's approaching 140. They just admitted a 3-year-old to Mensa, which is that goofy genius organization. And his IQ was only just over 140, but he's only 3 years old. He loves to read. He's 3 years old. He loves something else that's kind of fun. Some toy. I can't remember what the toy is. It's like Barney is his favorite toy or something. Anyway, according to Healy in 1990, most television programming communicates at about a 4th grade vocabulary level. So if you watch a lot of television, you don't pick up a lot of vocabulary. I'm guessing you don't pick up a lot of vocabulary. It's mostly fairly simple words, mostly monosyllabic words. Of men born in 1890, only 27% had more than an 8th grade education, and only 9% had any schooling after high school. This is in 1890. So my grandfather, who was born in the 1870s, my grandfather had a 3rd grade education, and that was okay because he became a common laborer and worked with heavy equipment. Of course, heavy equipment in the 1890s was a horse pulling something, was pretty much it. And then, of course, things became more mechanized. Automobiles were invented in the 1890s, and by the 1900s, we started having steam shovels and whatnot. And he was on the cusp of that. He was a really fairly bright fellow. He invented things, but of course there weren't a lot of things, there were a lot of holes in our technology at the time, so there were a lot of things that he could invent. One of the things that he invented was banking turns. It seems so logical now that people would bank turns, but before it was easier just to scrape off things that were straight. Now you didn't need to bank turns because nobody went fast enough to use the bank turns. But we did have a problem. The problem was with railroads. Railroads, of course, could go 30, 40 miles an hour, and when they went around curves, a lot of times if they hit the curve too fast, they would throw the cars off the track because everything was made without banking. And my grandfather invented the idea of banking railroad curves. Now you would think the guy would have lots of money, but he kept giving things away initially, and he figured that they would pay him for it. Well, they never paid him for it because people don't do that. They don't pay for things that they don't have to pay for, so they didn't. The other thing that he invented, and this one he kept under his coat, he invented the backhoe. He invented the backhoe, which is kind of fascinating. He was working with steam shovels. He was working with all this equipment, and he realized, well, geez, sometimes you don't need a steam shovel. Sometimes you just need a little bitty digger. So he put one on the back of a tractor. It has to do with hydraulics. And he invented it, and they used it in the 1930s. And then, but he didn't want to take it, he didn't want to patent it because all his other ideas had been stolen. So, no, he's a Republican. He thinks everybody's going to steal his ideas. He was a Republican. Anyway, so he invented the backhoe in the 1930s, and he kept it to himself for a really, really long time through the Depression. And that's how he survived the Depression, was by renting out these backhoes. So by the 1940s, of course, the Depression was ending, and he was getting older and sicker. So the federal government found out about his backhoe, and they took it from him. And they used it in World War II, and if you look it up on the internet, you'll find out that the guy that it doesn't even say he invented the backhoe. It's the first guy that did anything with it was a Brit. Well, the reason the Brit had the backhoe is because we took it over there. The United States military took it over there, and they left them there. And he's the first one to ever use a backhoe. But the United States military had been using them over here since 1941, so not important. So the old man didn't make any money because he was a Republican. And who was president of the United States in 1941? Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Democrat who he hated and thought the guy was a communist. So he wasn't going to do anything with his backhoe with FDR in office. Anyway, okay, so you can see there's not a whole lot of education taking place, not a whole lot of colleges in the United States. Didn't need them. There weren't kids to go to the schools, so I mean, if only 9% went to school after high school, most of these people were going to school to either become a minister or to become a teacher. They weren't going to, or to become a doctor, but there weren't that many doctors in the United States. If you wanted to be a lawyer at this time, you didn't go to law school. What you did, you apprenticed to another lawyer and you started reading law with him. In other words, you started reading law books. They did the same thing with medical school. You didn't really have to go to medical school. You could apprentice yourself to a doctor, and eventually all you needed to do was take the test and you passed. In 2012, the percentage of Americans over 25 who had more than an 8th grade education was approximately 94%. A lot of people getting GEDs in the United States. Well, about 6% of the people are getting GEDs. 58% had some schooling after high school, and approximately 11% had graduate degrees, and this is in 2012. Throughout the 20th century, until the last couple of decades, people were able to get by with as little as an 8th grade education. Most things in the United States military, if you read any of their the books that you're supposed to read in the military for your job, that's written in an 8th grade to the 8th grade education. So if you have a 3rd grade education, maybe you can't read these manuals, but as long as you have an 8th grade education, you're okay. I was born and raised in Indiana, in the Rust Belt. There were lots of factories all around us. When I went to high school, they educated us to be factory workers or farmers. All the kids in my high school class were, all their fathers were either factory workers or farmers. So they weren't educating us to go to college. It wasn't pre-college classes. They were all classes to teach us to work in factories or to be farmers, as weird as that may sound. So what kind of classes do you take? Well, you don't take a foreign language. You don't need a foreign language to work in a factory. Not back then. Everything was from the United States, and English was the only language being spoken. So you didn't need any foreign languages. You needed mathematics, but how far did you have to go? Well, college algebra was about as far as you went. Trigonometry was about as far as you went. There was no calculus. We didn't have calculus in my high school class. As a matter of fact, when I went to college, I didn't have to take calculus. I had to take a math class. I didn't have to take college algebra. There was nothing such as college algebra 50 years ago. So they were educating us to be factory workers, as weird as that may sound. So when I went away to college, I was kind of behind because most of the kids that went to college were kids that had had college prep. They had been to college preparatory high schools, or their high school was a city school. Mine was a rural school. Rural high schools, of course, only educated you the way that they needed to educate you. And they educated you to become a factory worker. And this was in the 1950s and 1960s. In the 21st century, it takes some college to get by, and there is an ever-growing proportion obtaining graduate degrees, lots of people getting master's degrees, a lot of people getting PhDs, a lot more now than have ever gotten PhDs and master's degrees before. You didn't need, these guys are of course putting an engine together. You didn't need a college degree to be able to handle a wrench or a screwdriver. That's just the way it is. My first wife wanted me to quit college and to go into the factory, because if I had done that, I could have become maybe a foreman. I could have become a supervisor, and potentially I could have made up to $120,000, $130,000. That's how much factory supervisors were making at that time. Well, I've never made more than $60,000 a year. So maybe she was right. Except the factory that she wanted me to go into, all the factories around where I'm from have closed. They're all closed. They all made car parts. They made, Delco Battery was there, Delco Remy was there. They made radios. Delco Battery, of course, made batteries. Guideland made headlights. Chevrolet made, they used to put Chevrolet cars together. Down the road was a Chrysler plant. And they put Chryslers together. So all those factories have closed now. And so I would have been, in my 50s, I would have lost my job and started looking for another job. Okay, we're gonna shift gears here. We're gonna talk about scapegoats. A lot of times politicians will look for somebody to blame things on. I don't know if you remember what Trump was saying at the beginning of his administration, but he was talking about illegal aliens being in the United States, all these immigrants coming across the border. He wanted build that border wall, which he hasn't done actually, but that's not important. Maybe that will be an issue in the next election. For some people, this was really, 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 really important. Other individuals, not so important. But he was using the people coming across the border, who he referred to as Mexicans, as his scapegoat. These are the people that are causing all the problems in the United States. They're taking your jobs, by God. We need to do something about that. And that's one of the ways he got elected, was by attacking people that other individuals are going, Mexicans, geez, I live in Iowa. I don't know if there's any Mexicans around here, but maybe he's right. We need to stop those people from coming across the border. And of course, what he was doing was scapegoating. He was scapegoating the Mexicans. He said, at one point he said that they were rapists and murderers. That these were bad people coming across. They don't send their best and their brightest. They only send their rapists and their murderers. And maybe some of the people are good, that's what he said. But he's been talking like this well, ever since he started running for president, as curious as that is. He's not the first person to use this technique. In Europe, after Christianity became the major religion in Europe, they used to scapegoat the Jewish people, as weird as that sounds. Why the Jewish people? Well, if you look at the Christian religion, somebody killed Jesus. Who killed Jesus? Who killed Jesus?
The Jews? The Romans?
The Romans did.
Nobody still alive.
He had to die so that he could be reborn. You got to understand that. So that makes the Romans the good guys, right? Because they're the ones who killed him. Wait a minute. What? You can't tell time. Come here. Come here. Why are Jews bad people?
Huh?
Why are the Jews bad people?
Why are the Jews bad people? Because one, they believed in a whole different entirety religion.
Oh my
Belief
God.
system. The other is they didn't look white enough.
Oh, jeez. Nothing worse than not looking white.
At least Aryan-ish,
Yeah.
I say.
So, wait a minute, I got a picture of the Jews right here. Does she look that, well, you can't really see her very well. Does she look that much different from that guy?
According to the pictures, yeah. Have you seen those pictures that Germans drew of Jewish?
Like
Yeah.
banana noses.
Dehumanizing the people first prior to
Oh,
actually
shit.
exterminating them entirely. It justifies it.
No, you mean because they look that much different?
Right?
Well, as long as they look different, let's kill them all. Isn't that the way it works?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just wanted to come by and just bother everybody. Take it easy, huh?
We'll see you, Marius. Thanks for coming by. So there's something wrong with Jewish people. They needed to decide how to put the Bible together. And when they needed to decide how to put the Bible together, and they were going to build the headquarters of the church in Rome, this gets kind of dicey, doesn't it? Maybe this isn't going to work. I mean, if we put the headquarters in Rome and we say that the Romans are the bad guys, that ain't going to work. So we need somebody else to be the bad guy. So at that point they decided that it was the Jews that killed Jesus. I know, your head's exploding, I'm sorry.
This doesn't make sense though. If you're gonna make Jewish people the bad guys, doesn't that mean Jesus is also the bad guy because Jesus is Jewish?
Oh, she's so logical. You're not supposed to be that logical. You're not supposed to think that deeply. They tell you that the bad guys are the Jews, and so you go, oh, okay, they must be the bad guys. That's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to question it. You couldn't question it, because if you questioned it, they would think that you were blaspheming, and then they would execute you. So just be careful about what you say. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. You have something to say to us?
Oh, no,
Okay, I thought you were gonna
never mind.
start
You
telling
know,
Cheyenne
you know,
there's something
come
wrong.
and think about it, it seems like Jewish people were just like pushed around wherever they went.
That's because they're the bad guys. They killed Jesus. They killed Jesus, even though Jesus was Jewish. See, the idea was that Pontius Pilate gave the Jewish people an opportunity to save Jesus' life, and they didn't do it. So then they crucified him. I know. He was supposed to be the king of the Jews. Of course, the Jews don't have kings, but, okay. Anyway. They became the bad guys. They became the scapegoat, and they became the scapegoat for everything. In the 14th century, the bubonic plague and other devastating diseases like leprosy swept through Europe. Guess who got blamed? The Jews. They were poisoning the water. They were poisoning the well to kill Christians, of course. Evidently, Jews want to kill all the Christians. The idea is that they're trying to kill all the Christians. I know. But the reality is that Christians are trying to kill all the Jews. Okay. These beliefs led to pogroms. Pogroms is where they just decide to go in and kill everybody in a village. And they did. They would go in and they would rape and murder and kill, try to kill everybody. Having a little fun while they were doing it, of course. And this was very, very common in places like Russia and Germany and Ukraine. This, as a matter of fact, this is a famous pogrom. This is a picture from a famous pogrom in the Ukraine. They tore everybody's clothes off and they chased them through the streets naked. Why would they do that? What is this, some sexual fetish thing going on? Well, yeah, kinda. Because they were subhuman creatures, so they could do anything that they wanted to them. So one of the things they did was tear all their clothes off, and that's what's happening here. This poor lady had clothes on it, and they've torn off her dress. The pogroms erupted periodically, and this is going on from the 11th century all the way through the 20th century. And then Hitler took over in Germany. In the 1920s, the Nazi Party gained power throughout Germany based on, in part on his platform of blaming all of Germany's problems on the Jewish population. They've got all the money, and of course, in the 1920s, the German money was worth nothing, and so it was the economy, stupid. So one of the things that Hitler blamed the Jews for was being rich. They were all the bankers, so it must have been their fault. Everything was their fault. Research by Voigtlander and Voth in 2012 disclosed that German cities that had Jewish pogroms in the 14th century were the same cities that had higher rates of violence against Jews in the 1920s and had higher support for the Nazi Party. Okay, so you grow up and your dad tells you, well, you can't trust Jews. Look, they look funny. They've got curly hair. They've got long noses. They are horrible, horrible people. Even though you don't have any proof of that, your dad just told you that. And this idea just keeps multiplying through the ages until the 20th century. And at that point, of course, the same cities that hated Jews back in the 14th century were the cities that became the strongest Nazi sympathizers, and they were the ones that had the highest rate of violence against the Jews. This is before World War II. And of course, during World War II, they tried to eradicate all the Jews in Europe, and they came pretty damn close. They killed 6 million of them. The estimates were as many as 10 million. We don't know exactly how many Jewish people were killed, because they didn't just kill them, they also had to dispose of the bodies in one way or another, and they burned them. And so they turned them into ash. So we have no idea. We're not really sure. There are a lot of Holocaust deniers out there. In some countries, it's against the law to be a Holocaust denier. In Germany, if you claim that the Jews were not attacked during World War II, then you can be arrested and put in jail for being a Holocaust denier, as weird as that is. However, there are a lot of people, right-wing individuals, in France and in Germany and in Ukraine that don't believe that this ever happened. There are people in the United States that are Holocaust deniers. And this kind of stuff is all over the internet. Great, it's great that we have the internet to spread all these insane ideas. My dad was in the military during World War II, and he was in the European theater, and his unit went through Germany and into Czechoslovakia, and they liberated one of the death camps. So I have secondhand knowledge of what was going on in the death camps, and they had whole stacks of dead bodies that were waiting for the crematorium. There were people that were still alive. The problem was that most of these people were starving to death, and you can't give food to a starving person. If you give food to a starving person, it will shock their system and they'll die. And that's what happened. When they first went into the camp, they had all these starving people, and of course the GIs are, it's breaking their heart, and they're throwing them chocolate bars and K rations and C rations and whatnot. And they'd eat a candy bar and lay down and die. So my dad had to stop them from feeding the people. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. People want to be nice. And he had to stop him because, well, his wife was a nurse, and they talk about these kinds of things. Okay, well, there you go, scapegoating. So now you know what scapegoating is. Because cultures evolved from their past circumstances, the early conditions of a culture matter a great deal with respect to how cultures subsequently evolve. The critical role of early conditions is one important reason that cultural differences can persist across time. And of course, you guys have your own traditions, and luckily, your traditions have persisted across time. Possibly these are pre-Columbian traditions. Hopefully they are. It would be great if all of your traditions were pre-Columbian. I kind of doubt it. I'm guessing that some of them were mixed with Christianity to make your traditions better. I don't know how many wives traditionally, how many wives can you have? Just one? Just one?
Today?
No, I know what it is today. It's a federal law today.
Yeah.
But traditionally, could somebody have 4 or 5 wives?
Where I come from, there's a man that had 3 wives.
3 wives, and he's Navajo.
Yeah,
Okay.
one was an auntie, then I think her daughters too.
He married. Okay.
The mom and 2 daughters.
Okay. Mom
Her
and
2 daughters.
Oh, he married
The mom and 2 daughters.
mom and 2 daughters. Okay. So he married somebody who had been married before. And the 2 daughters are from another marriage?
Same. The dad married the mom.
Right.
Then plus the mom's 2 daughters, so he had 3 wives.
Okay, 3
And they
wives.
all had kids. They all went to school together, and yet at the end they started fighting when they got into the adults.
Huh.
One was a bad murder.
Oh, okay. Well, but he was able to marry 3 women.
Some of them aren't really like married, they just
Make babies?
make babies.
Oh, jeez, everybody does that. Except me, I never do that. But a lot of people just make babies.
But some of them, like between 5 and 3.
Oh, okay, okay. So traditionally, and of course that doesn't happen anymore because of federal government. And the reason the federal government passed that law is because of the Christian religion, so.
Well, nowadays it's the same, saying that if you have more than 2, if you're messing around with women, multiple women at once, like 3 or more, or 2 or more,
Right.
they say that it causes health issues.
Ah. Oh, so all of a sudden it causes health issues.
Yeah.
He didn't have any problem, he had 3 wives.
Yeah.
That might have happened. weren't really close to my family because of the land dispute.
You never know. Okay, so let's talk about Protestants for just a second. Boston was settled by Protestant Puritans, a little bit different. Puritanism emphasized respect for authority and the importance of applying wealth and social position to community goals. Many of the original Puritans were highly educated intellectuals, and they felt that their dream of forming a utopia would emerge only from an educated population. So they believed in educating their population. This was in Boston. Philadelphia was settled by Protestant Quakers. Now, Quakers are a little bit different. If you've ever been to a Puritan service, the only person that gets to speak is the preacher. But if you've ever been to a Quaker ceremony, or not a ceremony, but a religious meeting of the Friends, they're Quakers, that's the other name for Quakers, everybody gets to talk if they want to, but usually that's not what happens. Normally somebody, they will sit and they will meditate for like 15 minutes. And if somebody feels the urge, if God sends them a message, they will get up and they will start speaking. And they will speak whatever's on their mind. There is no sermon. It is like the elders or the people that are speakers in the group will get up and they will talk. And sometimes 5 or 6 people will get up and say something during the meeting. Their idea is that God sends messages through select individuals. So whatever they're thinking is what God is telling them to think. That's the Quakers. Now the Puritans, they believe in education. They believe that you accumulate information by studying, by dealing with, by reading books. The Quakers feel that they are given knowledge by God. So the Quakers are a little bit different. The Quakers built the University of Pennsylvania, which is one of the Ivy League schools, with a utilitarian curriculum with medical, business, and engineering schools dominating the university. The school received very little community or financial support from the Quaker culture, as it had little trust in higher education. You can imagine if your knowledge comes from God, that you don't have to worry about gaining knowledge from an institution. So if I've got $1 million and the school needs money, I'm not going to give it to them, because I know where knowledge comes from. It comes from God. God sends it into you. I don't know if, I grew up around these guys. These Quakers are tons of fun, because you can't argue with them, because whatever they think is right, because God put that thought in their minds. So they're always right, no matter what. It's just really frustrating to deal with them, because you can't argue with them. Even if they're way off base, you can't convince them of anything.
Were they like going by their intuition too?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes, of course. I had a friend who was a Quaker. This guy served 20 years in the service. That wasn't the important part. You couldn't talk to this guy. Whatever he thought was right. He was a libertarian, which politically is kind of interesting. He's dead now, and the reason he's dead is because he was going around a corner and he was in his lane, and there was a car coming toward him, and he had gone over the line, and so he wasn't correct. And this guy was so set in his ways of being right that instead of swerving and getting out of this guy's way, he wouldn't swerve. Had a head-on collision and it killed him. Because he knew he was right. He died as correct. He was correct in his driving. The other guy was wrong, but he's still dead. But that's the stubbornness of the Quaker mind. As long as you're right, it doesn't really matter. And he died just because of that. I know, it's kind of a lot of fun. I know. Argue, This lady came to my house one time, this Quaker lady came to my house one time, and I was painting my wall, and I had taken my shirt off because it was hot. And she said, if you don't put on your shirt, you're gonna get skin cancer. And of course, you know, I love people that come to my house and tell me what to do. It's just a lot of fun. So I argued with her for a while. And of course, she left and she said, you're gonna die from skin cancer. That's the last thing she said to me. She cursed me. That was, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. I'm still alive, okay? I don't have skin cancer. And it hasn't killed me yet, but guess who died of skin cancer?
Herself.
Well, her son did, could die.
Oh my God.
I know, this is so weird. The Puritans built Harvard University, of course. The Quakers built University of Pennsylvania. The Puritans built it using a liberal arts curriculum that emphasized community service. The university received tremendous community and financial support and is today the most heavily endowed private institution in the United States. They have billions and billions and billions of dollars. Wouldn't it be nice if Diné College had endowments of billions and billions and billions of dollars, but of course we don't. The number of political leaders coming out of Harvard has been strong from its founding until today. Politics is one of the big things at Harvard University. Harvard University is an institution unto themselves, as interesting as that is. They are not a member of the APA. They are not APA certified. They're not certified by anybody. They do things their own way because, by golly, they've got all the money in the world and they can do whatever they want. They are not APA certified. Boston's culture has maintained its elitism, the Boston Brahmins, and respect for authority that can be traced back to its Puritan roots. So if you go to Boston, you better be careful because there is a select elitism in Boston that is different from other places that you might go. Philadelphia, on the other hand, because Quakers are a little bit different, their culture remained distrustful of authority and hard to govern, yet tolerant of diversity. Will Smith, of course, is from Philadelphia. Who else is from Philadelphia? Bill Cosby is from Philadelphia. Lots of diversity, lots of different ways of seeing the world. I know. They are the city of friends. As people immigrated to Boston and Philadelphia, they tended to adjust themselves to the prevailing cultural traditions as established by the Puritans and the Quakers respectively. Hence, the cities had been able to maintain the cultural traditions of their forebears. So if you go to Boston, a lot of authority there. Everybody respects authority, so you better, mind your P's and Q's in Boston. Philadelphia, you don't have to worry about it. In Boston, if you go to the baseball park in Boston, there are certain things that you can do and certain things you can't do. If you go to Philadelphia, you can do anything that you want. Philadelphia fans are the worst fans in the world for their own team. They're the only team that boos they're the only city that boos their own team. Normally, if you're a fan of St. Louis Cardinals, then you cheer for your team, but if your team's playing badly, you just don't say anything. But in Philadelphia, if your team is not quite as good as you want them to be, then you really give them the raspberries. You really give them a hard time. But that's in Philadelphia. Okay. Often we try to figure out what others are thinking when all we have to go on is what people tell us or our observations of how they behave. This is known as pluralistic ignorance, me trying to figure out what you're thinking. Pluralistic ignorance is the tendency for people to collectively misinterpret the thoughts that underlie other people's behavior. And of course, I made the mistake of going to Walmart in Gallup on Friday. Evidently, it was the first of the month. Okay. Yeah. So I'm pushing my cart, and who comes up but Christine's husband was there. She said, "What the hell?" He said, "What the hell are you doing here on the first day of the month?" I didn't realize it. I didn't think it was the first. It was the 31st. It wasn't the first day of the month. But he said when the first occurs on Saturday, then
I think you should buy it.
they pay everybody on the 31st. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't really that bad. But people, sometimes people won't look at you. Sometimes they just kind of run right into you, looking in the other direction, pretending that they don't see you. It happens. It happens more at Walmart than any other place in Gallup.
It's like that, like I went to boarding school where it's not really as bad as what everybody talks about,
Right.
but we were taught to have manners. So
Right.
it's like to this day, there's young students that are going to school now, they don't have manners.
Well,
They
who
don't
teaches
even
them to say, I'm sorry,
they don't
excuse
even say,
me?
excuse me. They just run into you.
Yeah.
Especially at the games.
I don't know. Here, well, I mean, it's at Walmart.
Technology.
It's technology. Yeah, they're well known, they run right into
Then
you.
people, they're not as nice as they
As they used to be.
No, it's just like they just look at you, and when you look at them, they look back at you and take off.
Yeah, as if you need to do
everywhere.
whatever they want you to do, as weird as that
It's
is.
everywhere.
However, if somebody is a little bit older and you say, excuse me, or they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I got in your way. If they're a little bit older, but the kids won't do that. They'll just kind of get in your way.
Is this just at Gallup Walmart that you noticed that, or?
Yeah, it's worse at Gallup than any place I've ever been.
This is why I like shopping off the reservation. Me and my brother love shopping anywhere else, especially in Flag, because we're like, if we accidentally bump into anybody, we're like, oh, I'm sorry, like, that was our fault. And they're like, no, it's fine. I'm like, I love you. Like,
Yeah.
over here, somebody bumped into me, and I'm like, oh, I said, I'm sorry. I must have gotten in your way. And she just looks at me, and I'm like, she bumped me, and she didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And then here she walks off, and she goes, people's big butts everywhere. How come they can't move? And I'm like, this whole place is crowded. This lady was as big as this table, and she was telling everybody else. they
Telling
had
you
butts.
that, that's kind of interesting. No, I go to Walmart, any place else, and I don't have nearly as much trouble as I do in Gallup. It's the worst place I've ever been, for some reason. I don't know why. I don't like going to Walmart anyway. But I know where everything is there, so that's where I go shopping. It's a little bit cheaper. Okay,
I like
now,
Walmart too, but Tom always goes to Walgreens. I say it's expensive here.
Mhm.
He still goes to Walgreens. I don't know why.
I don't know. You could go to Safeway, but geez, the prices are like twice as
He
much.
gets
Yeah.
groceries from Safeway, and I said, let's go to Walmart.
I've noticed that here on campus as well. But looking at it in a cultural perspective, the philosophy perspective, there's a saying that, you're not supposed to really look at people for too long, because you have to have respect. And for us, traditionally, we each have a spirit,
Okay,
and we gotta be precautious of that. We gotta watch what we think about one another.
right,
What we say about one another.
right.
And there's also transparency on feeling things. We're really well aware of that.
Right.
So sometimes, a lot of the youngsters, they're not really well aware of that.
Okay,
And they don't want to deal with it. So
Right.
they just shun themselves to keep themselves, pretty much keep to themselves and just avoid anything with anybody. And I see that a lot nowadays with today's generation.
Even here in class.
And it's just like, huh, I wonder why it's like that, So, that's just the way I see it. I just think maybe they're actually, they're actually respecting the no way. That's just natural for them to be that way.
Mhm.
Just respect people, don't want nothing to do with them, don't want to interact with them, just be on my own and over here, just.
Be in my own little world,
Yeah.
pretend that you don't exist.
Compared to somebody who's really got communication skills, could just,
Sure.
I guess you could say just anybody who's got power, who knows both sides, and say, hello there, how you doing? Yes, keep on walking, without saying hello, and pretty much in an obnoxious way like that, so.
That's not obnoxious, that's friendly.
Yeah, like in class. Even in class.
You could be, but then there are some people who just who are pretty much introverts.
Right.
they just like to keep themselves.
Oh, sure, well, of course.
It's just like.
But you have to
this
respect
morning.
those ways as well too. I mean, you can't just go over there and just trying to
Yeah,
shine the light on somebody's dark day, you know, who knows what they're going through too.
Sean sits at the back of me, like on Monday mornings, and it's like, I went in class, I wanted to say hi to everybody, it's just like, it's just quiet, everybody just sits down, and it's like, and then I noticed that Sean came in, I was gonna say, hi, Sean. It's just like, when I say that, they're gonna have all the eyes on me, something like that, it's just.
At the same time, there's a lot of judgmental
Yeah,
thoughts too, you know, thinking like if she were to do that to me, we've known each other for years, and they're gonna think, oh man, this guy's single, and she's married,
Oh,
what's going on
jeez.
over here, this and that, you know, like the youngsters
Really?
don't know. They don't know stuff like that, so there is a possibility of them being that way. At the same time, they're like afraid of that. It's happening nowadays, even on
How
social
can you
media.
interact at all with anybody?
But the way that this younger generation interacts
Mhm.
is through social media. That's the strange part as well too. So basically, the younger generation just became introverts.
Well, yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. You know, I walk through the coffee shop every day, and I don't see a lot of people interacting, hardly anybody. They're all sitting there and not talking or not even doing anything. with
then I
somebody
think at the
else.
same time too, you know, I do see it in Facebook too, that if people just keep to themselves, because when they say something to somebody, yikes, that person might yanny me.
Gee, Christmas.
So technology, I think that technology has a lot to do with the changes in behavior compared to like the older generations to where they didn't have crap like that to actually
So they had to actually
brainwash.
talk.
We had to go actually talk and
Had to actually
interact
talk to
like
each other.
that and become, you know, extroverts. Compared to nowadays, this new generation, they're just like,
I know, I see them with their earbuds. Drives me crazy. Okay, so after World War II, you know, the Nazis were god-awful people. They were terrible people. They didn't just kill the Jews, they killed everybody they came in contact with, just about. When they invaded Russia, I was watching a movie this weekend. It was a Russian movie. And they were talking about Belarus, which is right on the other side of Poland. That area was conquered by the Nazis, and when they did, they went into villages and they would take all the people in the village, they put them in one building, and they would burn the building and kill everybody. They just did this to 658 different villages in Belarus. As weird as that sounds. So the Germans they didn't just hate the Jews, they hated everybody.
The Nazis threw the kids in the fire.
Yeah.
After that.
Oh, they set it on fire. They'd blow it up, they'd throw explosives in and kill everybody. You know, this is millions and millions of people that they're dealing with. So the question comes up, my God, are all Germans such horrible people? And the answer was, no, not really, because a lot of them didn't know what the hell was going on. And this has to do with pluralistic ignorance. A good example of pluralistic ignorance was divulged in the studies done looking at German people after World War II by Hannah Arendt in 1964. Everybody was wondering, gee, Christmas. I mean, once all of this stuff came out, you know, you have your noble enemy. You're playing a basketball game against another school. Mini Farms is playing against Chin Lee, or Pinyan is playing against Kienta. They're playing, yeah, you don't want to kill, you want to win, but you don't want to kill the other team. They're your noble, and if they play really badly, then it doesn't mean that you're good. You want them to be a certain level of good. But of course, the Germans were a little bit different than this. They just wanted to annihilate everybody. They wanted to go into Russia, and they killed and raped and murdered so many people. So much different. I mean, it was just eradication.
was a methamphetamine.
It could have been. It could have been the methamphetamines. And so everybody after World War II, and all of this information is coming out, all these death camps. They killed their own people. They killed Jewish people. They killed political rivals. They were going into countries and just annihilating everybody, trying to eradicate everybody. So are the Germans really bad people? And that's what Hannah Arendt was trying to find out in 1964 with her book. A lot of research went into it, you know, these masses and masses of murdered people. The Japanese did kind of the same thing. They were really not very noble adversaries when you fought against them. As a matter of fact, at the beginning of World War II, when we first started fighting against the Japanese, we would go onto an island and we would try to capture their soldiers. And their soldiers would either commit suicide or force us to kill them. We took no prisoners. They took no prisoners. So when we first started fighting the Japanese, we weren't getting any information from them because everybody died. And that's one of the reasons why the Japanese theater was so different from the European theater. If we had a bomber that was shot down and 9 guys bailed out, they captured them. They didn't just butcher them right as they landed in their parachutes. They captured them and put them in prison. But that didn't happen in Japan. If a bomber crew was shot down, they were all killed before anybody could capture them. The Japanese thought that we had horns and we had tails, like the devil. Anyway, so we were trying to figure out what was going on, and this is what we discovered about the Germans. Arendt determined that Nazism was not followed because the German people were evil. It was followed because they were thoughtless and conforming. And that kind of fits what's going on sometimes in politics in the United States. There are a lot of people that don't think of politics until the day before the election. They label themselves as a Democrat or a Republican, and so for the rest of the time, any time something positive happens for the Republican, they cheer like a football game. And any time something negative happens, like the impeachment of Donald Trump, instead of looking at it to see what was going on, they just scream bloody murder because they're a Republican and they are loyal. And their loyalty has to do with their conformity. They don't have to think about it. Republican good, Democrat bad. And that's one of the reasons why he got so many votes last time. A lot of people didn't think about it. A lot of people hated Hillary Clinton, maybe because she was female. But potentially it was because of all the propaganda that was coming out about her. There was this one story that she and Bill were capturing children, and they were trafficking them, raping and not murdering, but they were raping these young children and forcing them into prostitution. And it was out of this one pizza parlor in New York City. And some guy went there with a gun. I mean, all this propaganda is coming out, and this one guy believed it. And he went to that pizza parlor with a gun, and he was going to free those kids. Well, it was all a lie. It was all propaganda. And as it turns out, all that propaganda was coming out of Russia. As much fun as that is. Okay, so there was a lot of lying taking place in the last election. A lot of propaganda. The Russians wanted Trump to be elected president. He hasn't been acquitted yet, by the way. He's still being impeached. The trial's still going on. It won't end until Wednesday. All right. We're not done. Let's do this chapter first. Let's start this chapter. As much fun as that is. So there's a lot of thoughtlessness taking place and a lot of conformity taking place, and that fits. We would rather follow politics that we don't have to think about. So and that fits some conservative politics. It fits some liberal politics as well. But that's what happened in the last election. What should always be the initial step in studying people from other cultures is to learn something about the culture that you're studying. So if you decided that you wanted to learn about people at Walmart in Gallup, which is a little bit different than just about every place else, you would have to figure out who those people were that you were running into in Gallup. The other day when I was at Gallup last time, this individual drove the wrong way down to park. And so what she wanted to do was she wanted to pull through. So she's going against traffic and she wanted to back into a parking place. So she stopped traffic for, about 5 minutes. And there was another person trying to pull out and she pulled in sideways. So she blocked this guy in, he couldn't get out. So then she got out of her car and she started walking into Walmart and he got out of his car and he said, "Lady, you gotta, your truck is crooked and I can't get out and I need to leave." So finally she got back in her truck. But it was, I was just sitting there going, oh golly, I don't want to get in this kind of an argument. It was fun, we had a good time. Anyway. It was an older lady. I have no idea what was on her mind. She was in a really big truck. So nobody. Huh?
Some of them are too stubborn.
Yeah, well.
It happens a lot. First of the month, that's why everybody went in town first of the month.
Driving down the wrong way. That's the thing that I couldn't figure. All the cars were coming this way. You had to park. Yeah, it was all angled parking, so.
First of the month, you just gotta let the elders do their thing.
That's another topic right there. People leaving their grandmas and grandpas in the vehicle. I've seen it happen. I really hate it. They just take their money and then they go in and it's not for the grandma. It would be different if they're like, oh, yeah, I'll get you your groceries. That's different.
Right.
It's different when, it's bad when you take their money, spend it on yourself, and just leave grandma in the car. It's ridiculous.
But then again, sometimes grandma's probably tired from walking around, so she stays in the car.
I saw some people that were so old they couldn't walk around. There were a lot of wheelchairs on Friday. A little bit of knowledge can go a long way in avoiding costly and embarrassing mistakes. The first thing you need to do is try to figure out who these people are. So here I am, a goofball from Indiana, and here I am coming down to Arizona to work on the Navajo reservation. So I needed to try to figure out who you guys were, in order for me not to make an ass of myself, which I do anyway, but that's neither here nor there. But if you're doing research, you need to figure out where you're going, who you're talking to. Your idea may not be their idea. If you're going to, I don't know, Kayenta, if you're going to Kayenta and trying to figure out the people of Kayenta and see if they're any different from the people where you come from. Is that a possibility?
Yep, there is.
Do they act differently? Are their traditions just a little bit different? Is there somebody was telling me this weekend that there are some people have different accents coming from different areas. People from Crown Point don't talk like people from Holbrook, and people from Holbrook don't talk like people from, I don't know, up in Utah. Everybody has a different accent, they said. And sometimes you can't really understand what they're saying. And sometimes they talk too fast. Oh, it's time to stop. I'll stop. Okay.
Yeah, they're all different. They look different too.
Is that right?
Yep.
So you can look at Cheyenne and tell where she